Welcome back. And as was mentioned earlier in the show, our final segment for today is looking at breaking barriers, and we're talking about children with disabilities. Joining us for this conversation, we have the UNICEF Belize country representative, Ivan Yerovi. We have the Special Envoy for Women and Children, Simplis Barrow. And we have a consultant for UNICEF, Garren Lumpkin, who looks at the current Zika response, inclusive education, and early childhood development. I'm sure others as well. We'll get into that. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, we know that you are actually preparing for a regional conference that is going to be held in Belize, looking at children with disabilities. That's and right. The overall inclusiveness, education, employment, whatnot. I want to start off by just taking a look at our current situation. How are we doing in terms of ensuring that children with disabilities have the best quality of life possible?
Should I start?
Yes.
Well,
it's a tough one, I know.
I know.
You
It's
start.
a tough one, but
it's good to know where we are, to know where we want to head.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think the country has made progress. Of course, we haven't reached to the goal of having an inclusive society. Of course, we can discuss about services available for children with disabilities. But for us, what is very important is to understand the problems that children with disability face on a regular basis. Usually, families do not bring those kids to the society. They are not integrated into the society. They don't have access to education, and later on, they don't have access to a decent job, for instance, right? So for us, the first thing is to try to have a society that is fully aware of these issues and be a society that can, be inclusive. In terms of availability of services, the country still has, I would say, a long way to go. Because providing services for children with disabilities require resources, financial resources, require people well trained about those issues, and really people that know how to handle children with disabilities. But throughout all these efforts and the partnership that we have with the Special Envoy and the Ministry of Education and others, I think we have made some progress, but I think we still have a long way to go.
So for the general public, so that they are aware of what you mean, for UNICEF, what does the scope of inclusion include? What areas specifically?
Well, starting from when when a child is born, first of all, making a right diagnosis of the situation of the children. Later on, we're talking about access to early childhood development. We need to have, special services provided for children with disabilities, and then having access to education. I mean, children with disabilities do have the right to go to school.
Yeah.
Of course, the school system is not well prepared for that, right? We have good examples of schools being, open and able to handle children with disabilities. Stella Maris, for instance, is one of those schools. And then the challenge of transitioning to secondary school and later on to tertiary school. So it's a long way to go that the country needs to be prepared for that, to be able to handle that. We have good examples of Belizean kids going all the way to college. It's been very difficult. It's been very difficult. And we don't want to have just one child, accessing tertiary education or going to college. We would like to see all the kids going through this process, the education system. Yeah.
I think that even though Ivan has painted a acceptable, let's put it that way, picture of our children with disabilities, I must say we have really come far. Considering what we have today. I think Ivan, when we were talking a little earlier, he said one of his first events was the presentation of the situational analysis in Belize on children with disabilities. And at that time, we did not have anywhere for children to go to get the therapy that they need if they were born with a disability. Today, we have that. Today, we have more people advocating for children with disabilities to go to school. Today, we have companies who recognize children with disabilities who need to be in school and have offered them scholarships. And we can't overlook that.
Yeah.
And we need to use those examples to say it can happen and that it is possible. So for me, I think that it is important that we all look at what it is that we are doing to improve the lives of children with disabilities, to ensure that we live in an inclusive society, to ensure that our teachers, our administrators, the company management, everyone is sensitized.
Yeah. And I think that is actually a part of what this conference will do. You'll look at best practices, see what's working, and of course, tap into some of those areas that you know to be a concern. Garren, you mentioned something so absolutely important in terms of looking at Zika response. And yes, we have spoken so much about Zika, but I think the fundamental fear that people have is not about getting ill for a week with a cough and a rash. It's about the possibility of having an increased population of children with disabilities. Let's talk about what your contribution will be in terms of looking at what potentially can be a change in the landscape in this region in terms of number of children with microcephaly and potential other developmental defects that will come along with microcephaly.
Well, one thing I think is important in looking at, you know, the type of response in which at first in most of the countries there was a response more along the line of vector control, looking at the attempt to prevent, you know, the impact of Zika, mostly, you know, through the vector control and personal prevention. What's happening now is, based upon experiences in Brazil, which is, you know, worldwide, the spark that has really, you know, pushed this topic, is to look at how one can also respond, because the whole strategy of vector control is reducing but not eliminating the situation. So as what we're working on now is a combination, you know, of looking at personal protection, but also how we look at the area of child care and family support.
Yeah.
It is also raising the issue of that, in addition to looking at the impact of Zika, we also, I think most countries are looking at that many countries are not doing enough for other congenital malformations, children that are being born with disabilities. And so I think the Zika is also causing an awareness in the countries that we need to do more in the whole area. But what I think is important, and I'd like to kind of link it to what's happening in Belize. My first job with UNICEF in 1981 was to do a study on disability in Central America, and my first visit was to Belize in September of 1981, one week before independence. And so I can see since 1981 where we're at now. And one of the things I'd like to highlight, and it comes along the line of inclusion, is I think Belize is really moving forward with something that most people don't recognize. It's that the different sectors are looking at disability and to see how they mainstream the issue of disability in what they're doing, whether it be in social, health, and education. And matter of fact, today we have a workshop on looking at neonatal care and Zika with the Ministry of Health. So what I think is important is when we combine looking at when does inclusion start and when does it spot, it really starts even before birth. When you're looking at the prenatal stage, when pregnant mothers are identified, they're affected by Zika, how you begin to create and support families so when they look at the issue of disability, the possibility that there's more of a positive response. So what we're looking at and trying to do in terms of, in addition to vector control, is how do we work with families to make sure that that first contact, that first orientation is positive. Because in most countries, that first contact with the health sector is usually extremely damaging.
Now, Garren, you bring a very unique perspective, because I'm very sure, based on conversations I've had, and I'm sure everybody else here has had, that once upon a time, children with disabilities were locked up in a room in a home and were never exposed to even sunlight because there was so much stigma and discrimination. How much does that impact, this discrimination and stigma that people still face today? If we're to be very realistic about the situation, how much does it impact the type of care that a child can have access to, or a person with special needs or diverse abilities may have access to?
Well, I think that what we look at the issue of inclusion, and I'm going back to the theme of the conference, is that the inclusion, many times we look at adults and we look at inclusive education when children start school. But inclusion really starts at that first stage, and inclusion starts within the family environment. And so if families are not supported, if the health sector, others create this negative vision, the helplessness, that really starts almost, the impact on the child at the first stages. And we know it in terms of child development. And this is what I'm really impressed with Belize in terms of the understanding and working together, the different ministries around early childhood and parenting, is that the stigma and discrimination, if parents have a negative attitude caused by the bad advice they get at first, it starts the whole process of exclusion. And inclusion really starts at that first stage in the home environment.
That first
Exactly.
What parents do when a child is born with disability really determines a lot in the future.
And sometimes parents don't know what to do.
And sometimes they don't know what to do.
That's the point,
we
it's
have
parenting.
seen a huge change in attitude at the Inspiration Center. It's because they have that access. And parents, even siblings. I had a little boy who came up to me and said, this has really helped my little brother. Just coming here and getting the therapy. He's doing other things that he wasn't able to do before.
As it relates to the strides in our Belizean education system, we talk about inclusive education, not just for children with disabilities, but for families as well. What kind of programs or courses are available for families who may have a child born with microcephaly or other birth defects that might lead to disability within their lifespan? What kind of educational courses are available for families in this instance?
Are you talking about Belize or in general?
In the context of Belize.
In the context of Belize. I think right now what's happening is that if a child is born with a disability, the gynecologist, the doctor, would recommend that child to the Inspiration Center. And at the Inspiration Center, another doctor sees the child and then determines a course forward. So every child is different. Right now, I think that's really where the focus is on, building capacity there. I think you bring up a good point for parents. At the Inspiration Center, they encourage parents to come to see the therapy that the therapist is doing, so that they can then go home and
implement that practice.
Right, incorporate that in their daily lives.
One thing I'd like to mention, and I really would like to talk a little about what I see after so many years of having contact with Belize. The important things that I think many times we don't recognize the advancements in Belize is exactly this. Early learning doesn't start when children enter school. It starts in the home environment. So this work with parents, and like what you're saying in terms of that first advice is important. So what I think is important in Belize is that I'm really impressed with the different ministries working together around how you look at the life cycle, how you work with parents, recognizing that to be ready for school doesn't start the day before going to school. It starts when children are born, and the parenting and the stimulation going on, and the program, the roving caregivers.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, it's so important.
That's through the Ministry of Human Development, and I've always said, I can't imagine the impact it must make. I mean, whether you have other children or your child with a disability is your first child, having someone come in and show you and explain to you how you can help that child learn from a young age has to have great impact.
What Garren is mentioning, I think, is very important to underline the importance of working, the three ministries working together.
Very important.
Health
very
has
important.
I mean,
huge role
because I mean, 98% of the deliveries in this country happens in the hospitals, in the public hospitals. So that's how the health sector will recognize or diagnose the children with disability. And then we have human development with the roving caregivers. But additionally to that, one of the criteria for the BOOST program is precisely families that have a children or child with disability. How, of course, is a financial contribution to the families, but still, I mean, it's part of the social protection system, and changing the criteria to include families that do have a child with disability. That's part of precisely this integrated approach to deal with children with disabilities.
Now, let me touch on a sensitive area here, because I think it is absolutely important. The theme, and I love it, it talks about an inclusive society. We're not saying inclusive schools, we're not saying inclusive families, we're saying a society in general. And where it comes to education, if we go early childhood, we have the roving caregiver, the BOOST program. Where it comes to education, there's Stella Maris, there's some great examples of inclusion within mainstream schools with children who are blind, children who are deaf. We have Rowan Garrell, who's gone off to college. We have Dr. Einstein-Boden, who has returned as a medical doctor. So we have some highlights to be able to show. Earlier this year, I did a story with children from Stella Maris graduating. And I am floored by there has been a change in terms of having children acquire employment after graduation. But it is a struggle for them. And one of the things that we do find is that there's some disabilities that are easier for people to accept, while others are still very much stigmatized. There are children in this country who graduate from Stella Maris to go into babysitting care for the rest of their lives. And there's something about that. I understand UNICEF works with children, and Special Envoy, you've done work with the Inspiration Center. But it is crucial to understand, if you're talking about a society that is inclusive, that we all are able to adapt our roles in ensuring that children and eventually adults with disabilities have equal opportunities. What can be done? What has been done? What needs to be done to change the situation? Because I love the idea of an empowered child, but if they reach 18 and that's where their opportunities stop, then what's the point?
I think that that's where a lot of advocacy comes in terms of advocating with companies to hire persons with disabilities. I do believe that there has to be some sort of helping persons with disabilities put together their resume, sort of guide them, and that's, you do that all the time. So I think the advocacy has to continue, that to really and truly be an inclusive society, it transcends just education. It has to go into the workforce, and we have to see them in the workforce. So again, I guess, the advocacy continues.
Well, one of the things, going back to the early childhood linked to education, linked to adolescence, is that when we talk about education, I think many times we look at more of the academic and that. But part of the issue in early childhood, starting with early childhood and going through and connecting the dots, is that inclusion also requires working with children in terms of self-regulation, in terms of social skills, in terms of
Emotional
communication.
intelligence.
And so if you don't work on that, even if you provide them the academic background, but yet you're not preparing them to be empowered, the communication, understanding, it's difficult. Just to give you an example, when I worked in California in an early intervention program, in the school I worked at, there was for young adults, and they were training, they were preparing them. During the summer, because we as teachers didn't make much money, I worked in a cannery, canning fruit in California, and next to me there were 2 students from the same school. And they went like 2 weeks and they didn't continue. And it wasn't because they couldn't do the work. It was nobody trained them in the social skills, communication skills. And that has to start in the family. I mean, you can't wait and expect the education system to fill in. So that's what I'm saying. A lot of things we look at that are important in inclusion, both from the child, is that they have the skills like communication and social skills.
Yeah.
You know?
When we look at inclusive society, and Marleni talked about, after turning 18, I used to work in London with an NGO that advocates for high-functioning persons with disabilities to, be integrated into education, university, having employment. What are the strides that Belize needs to make in terms of having not only the public sector, but the private sector buy into this idea of what it means to be inclusive?
The issue of, we have to continue advocating and working with them. They will have to realize that everyone plays a role. The private sector is, we need to engage with the private sector, we need to talk to them, but then on the other side we have to prepare children with disabilities or young adults with disabilities for the workforce. But definitely the private sector plays a major role, and we have to insist and we have to see, they need to see the benefits.
It's a social acceptance.
Right.
Of course.
I've heard from businesses, my customers won't like if my bag boy or person who opens the door has a disability.
Yes, the
and
discrimination, the whole
it's
issue
not
of
so much the private
discrimination.
sector as much as us as a society, that
But
needs to
we
change.
but we as a society need to
Yeah,
to step
of course.
up, and we need to speak out too, because it's unacceptable.
Even when it comes to living conditions, having these children with disabilities grow up and maybe live in a community where they can function on their own, where they don't have to have a carer or maybe just a support worker that comes in once in a while.
And that's why the occupational therapy is so very important. And that's one of the services that is provided at the Inspiration Center. So, but just to go over quickly the rundown of the disability conference.
So we hope that, and I didn't want to take it into a down point, because there is a lot to celebrate. Let me not take away from that. But there are areas and gaps that have been identified, and I had to bring it up because that story was very hard to do, and I hope that it's a part of your conference from this point forward. But you have 2 days with quite some distinguished guests coming in as well. So let's talk about what's coming up over the course of Thursday and Friday.
So we'll talk tomorrow, Thursday morning. We're having a walk with us, and this is really under the Special Olympics, UNICEF, and Special Envoys banner. And again, there's nothing we can do for persons with disabilities if we don't include them.
That's right.
And if we don't showcase them. So we're doing a walk in the morning tomorrow at 6 a.m. We'll be leaving the Radisson, and we'll be walking over to MCC grounds, and there will be a football match with our children, with our Special Olympics children and other kids. So it will be an inclusive game, and again, it all has to do with inclusive, unified sports and that type of.
So you start off with some exercise.
Yes, we start off with some exercise, because exercise is very important for our children with with disabilities. And then the official opening starts at 2.
Okay.
And right after our official opening, we go into a high-level panel. And maybe you want to say about those
VIPs
coming? Yes, the VIPs that will be on the high-level panel tomorrow?
Well, yeah, we're going to have a video presentation of the Assistant Secretary General of the UN as the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, another UN agency. Then we have the Development Consultant for Special Olympics North America coming to country. We will have Patrick Faber, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Education as well, and the First Lady of Guyana, talking on this first high-level panel. Ended up with the presentation of a child living with disability. That is so important to listen to them and hear what they have to say. Social event after that, and then we have on Friday, for the following day, we have Beverly Reynolds. She's the coordinator for health and human development for CARICOM. Our dear friend Garren, also speaking on early childhood development, progressive milestones starting at home. Then we have a cross-sectoral approach, the importance of having, an integrated services available. And then we have David Lee Cox, CEO on the Ministry of Education. Liani Arthurs from Ministry of Human Development. And then we have a consultant coming from Costa Rica, Gerardo Quiroz. He was in charge of implementing a project that deals with children with disabilities in emergency situations. Very relevant for our context. Hurricane season, emergencies, etc., etc. After lunch, we're going to have an expert from Barrow, Washington, talking about Zika and its impact. Garren has been talking about that. And the final plenary session, we're going to have a presenter from St. Lucia. What else? We have a presenter.
A parent with a child with disability.
Exactly. Thank you. And we will end it off with some sort of a roadmap and call to action that Ms. Simplis Barrow is going to do in the final session of the event. So experts from different countries, from Central America, from the region, from the Caribbean, sharing with us experiences and best practices on how to be an inclusive society, how to provide services for children.
What is your hope in terms of what the objectives of this particular conference will mean?
I think one of the things, and we touched on it earlier, is again trying to get our children with disabilities who are graduating from high school into the workforce. And I think that will be one of the major things. Again, the Zika virus, how will it affect it? It might not be right now, but it will affect us later on. And how do we deal with it? How do we build capacity at the center, at the Inspiration Center that we have? Because it won't go away. It won't go away. So we just have to be prepared.
All right. Is the conference open to the public?
Yes, it is open to the public. Everyone is invited to come and be a part of it and participate. You can come and walk with us on tomorrow morning at 6 a.m.
It's at the Radisson, right?
It's at the Radisson. So you jump to the afternoon session.
The show starts at 6:30. It's very difficult, but I think it's a great opportunity for people to go out and show their support of people who live very different lives from us, but of course should be included in all aspects of society. This is a great opportunity to be able to learn how other countries in the region are coping, other organizations are functioning, and to share our experience as well as to what we're getting right, and hopefully make the lives of children with disabilities better.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
best
so much.
of luck over the next 2 days.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
We're going to go ahead and take that final break. When we come back, we'll have our wrap up, so stay tuned.